We need to really, really look at what's happening across this country as we see and are obligated to remember that some of these monuments, most of these monuments actually, dare I say all of them, have one purpose. And that purpose is to honor the Confederacy, which was formed for one reason and one reason only. That's to preserve Southern states' right to own Black people. So when we hear that states from Texas to New York are currently passing or working on passing legislation that will protect these monuments, then we're obligated to talk about it and talk about that truth of how harmful both the intent and these actions are. So we see in a recent article, we learned that over the past decade, this article by USA Today review found that legislators in at least 20 states have proposed more than 100 bills that would limit changes to the hundreds of Confederate monuments across the United States. And some of these statutes propose harsh financial penalties or even criminal charges against municipalities that remove these monuments. Others will create complex approval systems that ultimately let state legislators and state leaders decide the fates of these monuments. Now, keep in mind that these Republicans are supposed to be state rights advocates or giving rights to those who are elected in these places to decentralize power, right? But in actuality, they're taking the power away from municipalities like my own and other municipalities that would remove these statues, and saying that even though these statues were supposedly gifts from the Daughters of Confederacy to you all, we see that you don't need to have that power because you are taking or removing these statues that we love and will continue. That USA Today article continues talking about attorneys, researchers, and legal experts say so much and such about these laws that don't affect cities' control over these monuments. They are part of a large attempt to erode the power of blue cities in red states. It happens all across this country in states where Republican-controlled legislators. This was said by Skule, who is represented in North Carolina NAACP and monument case. Like they are passing laws to control the urban centers, which are democratically controlled. Here's what I would push back on this statement just a little bit. It's not just democratic cities that are like municipalities that are large and urban. I represent a rural district, and we removed the Confederate monument. And we saw that even a Democratic control, the governor was very light on what he was willing to do as it pertains to us. Sharon, what are your thoughts on this type of protecting of these Confederate monuments?
Well, I'm just struck by such widespread collusion that these just, must be protected. In many cases, when you don't even know your history, like, we've had the issue with Stone Mountain here in Georgia for all these years. When did the carvings go up? These aren't protected artifacts, okay, Mayor? These are symbols to push back. These are symbols to say, don't you dare vote. These are symbols to say you're never going to get ahead and we still own you. And we can do what we want. We'll change the laws. You get too far out of the pocket, we'll just change the laws. So I'm just struck by how many, this isn't like a rogue thing, how many of these people get together and follow the same playbook, all geared to this kind of Jim Crow racist nonsense.
Yeah, I think you're spot on with that. And I also think that we need to consider the history of these monuments and when they went up. You said that, and that's an important part because most people think these happened right after the Confederate War, but that's not the case. The United Daughters of Confederacy, who are responsible for most of these monuments around the country, were acting in a method to protect white supremacy, to protect antebellum South, and also to honor the Klan. People forget that part. You cannot speak negative about the Klan. So, and this is not something we're talking about out of context, right? I have an intimate interaction with the North Carolina law, particularly as I remove one of these racist statues myself. Let's take a look at this video.
Death of the Confederate in this town. We're just tied off right here where I tied that piece at.
So in this video, what we saw was we actually saw the end of it, not me actually taking the hammer to this monument which stood in a public park that had on one side a white people only water fountain and also a 10-foot monument honoring Confederates in a town that's 90% Black, the town that I represent. And what happened after we took this monument down, we saw the FBI show up in the town a couple of days later and start to investigate me, not because the town owned the statue, but because I was a threat to white supremacy, the status quo. And we had a police chief that called the State Bureau of Investigation and said, hey, I think the mayor broke the law by taking this statue down. Let alone after the statue was taken down, there were no investigation into the racism that came at me, the death threats that I received. And while the governor said that they were going to investigate it, that the laws it didn't really happen. We still have on my desk in the office, in the town office, at my house, on my kitchen table, the threats still sitting in the same place. When we received them, we saw the same Klan, the Loyal White Knights that planned what happened in Charlottesville. We saw them come to our community and leaf our yard, telling white people they need to rise up against this uppity. And I don't need to finish the spelling because we know what they said. And I think what happens is in this case, we are reminded that this is not about statues in cemeteries to honor the dead. If we look at what we know about up into the 1880s, these Confederate monuments were placed in cemeteries, of course, but the decades after that war, talking about the Civil War and Reconstruction, they started going up in front of courthouses and public places as a symbol of white supremacy. They actually sending a message about who's in charge, right? It's sort of like a reestablishment of white control. Ultimately, what they want is not only for black men not to vote. This is the history of these statues, right? Not only for black men not to vote, but any sort of black elected official to be involved in government. And this was a statement by Karen Cox on WRL. And we know that to be true. Like, these statues had everything to do with the alienated of black individuality, black power. And it was all about white control of the black body. And I think we don't talk about that enough in that context when we're talking about these monuments and the epigenetics of the harm that are associated with black people being obligated to go to a public park and see a statue that says, we are honoring the people that believe that you were supposed to be owned by another set of people. What say you, Sharon?
Legal lynching. I'm very disturbed by what you are relating, your own personal experience, the death threats, the chief calling in the Bureau to investigate you. It sounds way too close. And not that long ago, that legal lynching, God forbid, Mayor, would have been complete. It would have been complete. And the Southern Daughters, people need to understand, they didn't just kind of accidentally, they set about to rewrite history, reframe slavery. There are still books in Georgia that were fed to classroom kids about how slavery wasn't so bad. And they just kind of sung and passed the time and made the day go quicker. It was all lies. A horrific, disgusting, vile, violent institution that they are trying to honor, a period when you better stay out of public office. Remember, there was a time in Reconstruction where people who looked like us were serving at greater numbers than today. It sounds like it's not what I just said is fact. And then, boy, they did rise up, didn't they, Mayor? And make sure that you shut up, know your place, and we will be violent if we have to keep you in it.
Absolutely, and we'll use all the powers of the government, just like they're doing now, to protect white supremacy. And I think when we don't consider this long legacy of white supremacy and how the government, both at the state and also federal level, supports it, then we don't really talk about what effects it has on the black life and the black experience in this country.
It's in all areas. It really is, and it feels like there's no escape when you just want to live, be free, be happy, raise a family, serve, whatever it is, Mayor. It really feels that there is no escape because it's in everything, including healthcare. It's in everything. We're treated differently. The disparity is real.